It all started, as these things often do, on a perfectly unremarkable Tuesday. The sun was doing its usual morning routine, painting the sky in those soft pastels that make you think, just for a fleeting moment, that the world is a gentle and reasonable place. I was nursing my first coffee, staring out at my pride and joy, a lovingly restored 1978 Ford F-150, gleaming cherry red under the climbing sun. That truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was a testament to weekends spent wrestling with rusted bolts, the smell of oil and paint. The deep satisfaction of bringing something beautiful back to life with my own two hands. It was parked perfectly legally in my own driveway, mind you, well within the pristine, almost obsessively manicured lines of our suburban enclave, Harmony Glades, Harmony. I'd soon learn that name was more of an aspiration than a reality, especially since Brenda arrived. Brenda Knott, our newly self-appointed HOA president, had a name that, in hindsight, perfectly encapsulated her personality, a tight, unyielding knot of officious self-importance. She'd swept into the neighborhood a few months prior, all crisp power suits and a clipboard that seemed permanently attached to her hand, muttering about upholding standards and community values, which mostly translated to measuring lawn heights with a laser level and issuing passive-aggressive newsletters about the precise shade of beige permitted for mailbox posts. I took another sip of coffee, blissfully unaware that the gentle world was about to get a rude shove. I had a client meeting later that morning. I run a small custom carpentry business and needed to load up some samples. An hour later, coffee finished, to-do list mentally checked, I walked outside and stopped. The space where my beautiful red beast should have been was just empty. A gaping concrete void. For a solid 10 seconds my brain simply refused to process it. Had I parked it on the street last night after that late run to the lumber yard? No, definitely not. I distinctly remembered backing it in, admiring the way the porch light caught the chrome. A cold knot, far tighter than anything Brenda could conjure, formed in my stomach. Stolen? Here? In Harmony Glades, where the biggest crime wave usually involved someone putting their bins out an hour too early. Then I saw it, stuck to my front door with an aggressive amount of tape, a neon orange violation notice. My eyes scanned it, the official-looking HOA letterhead practically screaming with self-righteousness. Vehicle in violation of Article 4, Section B, Subsection 3, unapproved commercial signage. I blinked. Commercial signage. My truck had my business name, Mike's Custom Carpentry, and my phone number on the doors, discreetly lettered in a tasteful font. It had been like that for 5 years, long before Brenda and her reign of beige. It had never been an issue, never, and unapproved? There was no approval process for something that was never forbidden. My initial disbelief quickly curdled into a hot, simmering anger. This wasn't just a mistake, this felt personal, targeted. I stormed back inside, snatched my keys, and jumped into my wife's sensible sedan, my mind racing. The notice listed aggrieved citizen towing as the perpetrator. I'd never heard of them. My first call was to the HOA management company, a faceless entity that usually only responded to emails after a 3-day waiting period. I got a bored-sounding receptionist who informed me that all violation enforcement was now under the direct purview of the HOA president, Ms. Knott. Of course it was. My next call was to Brenda. It went straight to a voicemail message delivered in tones so saccharine they could induce a diabetic coma, extolling the virtues of community cooperation. I left a message keeping my voice as level as I could, stating the facts and requesting an immediate call back to rectify this outrageous error. The silence that followed was deafening, a clear indication of the brick wall I was up against. This wasn't just about my truck anymore. This was about a power trip, a petty tyrant flexing muscles she didn't rightfully possess, and as I drove towards the address of aggrieved citizen towing, a grim resolve began to set in. Brenda Knott had picked a fight with the wrong carpenter. She might have towed my truck, but I had a feeling, a deep gut feeling, that before this was over, I'd find a way to metaphorically tow her entire smug little world right off its foundations. The game, as they say, was on, And I play to win, especially when someone messes with my truck and my peace of mind with such blatant, unadulterated gall. The drive to the impound lot felt like a journey into a special kind of suburban hell, a place where reason went to die and bureaucratic vultures picked at the bones of your patience. Aggrieved Citizen Towing, it turned out, was located in an industrial park that looked like it had been forgotten by progress sometime in the late 70s. The office was a grimy trailer with barred windows, and the air hung thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and despair. The man behind the scratched perspex window looked like he'd been carved from a block of resentment and then left out in the rain. He grunted when I explained why I was there, then slowly, agonizingly slowly, typed my license plate into a computer that seemed to run on steam power. Yep, F150, red. Towed from Harmony Glades, order of the HOA. He slid a form under the window. That'll be $350, cash only. Plus daily storage starting tomorrow. $350 for parking in my own driveway. The injustice of it was a physical ache in my chest. There's been a mistake, I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. My vehicle was legally parked. There's no rule against the lettering on my truck. I need to speak to whoever authorized this. He gave a short, humorless laugh that sounded like gravel rattling in a tin can. Talk to your HOA, buddy. I just follow orders. Got the paperwork right here, signed by a Ms. Brenda Knott. Says commercial signage violation. Looks legit to me. He tapped the greasy form. Pay up, or it stays. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it all left me speechless for a moment. This wasn't just a mistake, it was highway robbery, sanctioned by Queen Brenda herself. I paid, the wad of cash feeling like blood money leaving my wallet. Getting my truck back was the priority, fighting the injustice would come next. As I walked through the dusty, oil-stained yard to where my beautiful red beast was held captive, flanked by a collection of dented, forlorn vehicles, my anger solidified into a cold, hard resolve. Brenda Knott had drawn first blood, but this was far from over. Once my truck was safely back in my driveway, a spot I now regarded with a newfound sense of embattled territoriality, I called Brenda again, and again. Each call went to that infuriatingly cheerful voicemail. It was clear she was avoiding me, confident in her petty victory, so I switched tactics. I retrieved my copy of the Harmony Glades Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, a document so dense and filled with legalese it could sedate a rhinoceros. For hours I pored over every clause, every subsection, armed with a highlighter and a growing sense of righteous indignation. I searched for Article 4, Section B, Subsection 3. And I found it. It pertained to permanent structures or alterations to property requiring architectural review, things like sheds, fences, or major landscaping changes. There was absolutely nothing, not a single word, about vehicle lettering. The commercial signage she'd cited was likely from a misremembered or maliciously misinterpreted clause about advertising signs placed on lawns, the kind real estate agents use. She had either willfully twisted the rules or was so incompetent she couldn't understand plain English. My money was on a toxic combination of both. The next day, armed with my annotated copy of the CCRs, I decided on a more direct approach. I knew Brenda held her little court at the community clubhouse on Wednesday mornings, a sort of informal office hours where she could dispense her wisdom and admonishments to any resident foolish enough to wander in. I found her there, perched on a floral armchair like a queen on a slightly tacky throne, lecturing poor Mrs. Henderson about the unacceptable vibrancy of her petunias. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm but firm, cutting through her monologue on approved floral palettes. She looked up, a flicker of something. Annoyance? Surprise? Crossing her usually placid features before being replaced by a mask of polite condescension. "Mr. Davies, isn't it? To what do I owe the pleasure?" The sarcasm was laid on thick. "We need to discuss my truck, Brenda," I said, holding up my copy of the CC. "Rupees. You had it towed illegally. There is no provision in these documents that prohibits the lettering on my vehicle. You cited a non-existent or completely misapplied rule. I detailed my findings, pointing to the actual text of Article 4. Her smile tightened. "Well, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice dripping with faux patience, "the HOA board interprets the rules as we see fit to maintain community standards. The prominent advertising on your rather large truck was deemed unsightly and not in keeping with the aesthetic we are trying to cultivate in Harmony Glades." "Unsightly? My truck? I've had people stop me in parking lots to admire that truck." "So, you're admitting you just made up a rule because you personally don't like my truck?" I pressed. "It's not making up rules, Mr. Davies." She sniffed. "It's exercising necessary discretion, and the matter is closed." The vehicle was in violation, and the fee was levied. She actually had the gall to look smug, as if she'd just won a major victory for civilization. I saw a few other residents in the room exchange uncomfortable glances. Mrs. Henderson looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her. This confirmed it. Brenda wasn't just a stickler, she was a bully, drunk on the thimbleful of power her HOA presidency afforded her. The frustration was immense, but underneath it, a different kind of fire was being lit. She thought she could just dismiss me, steamroll over me with her made-up authority. She had no idea who she was dealing with. My background wasn't just in carpentry. My father had been a city planner, and I'd spent many a summer internship wading through zoning codes and permit applications. I knew my way around bureaucracy, and I knew that people like Brenda, who rely on bluster and intimidation, often have skeletons in their own closets, or at least poorly constructed sheds. The fight for my 350 and an apology was rapidly evolving. This was becoming a crusade. My deep dive into the HOA's inner workings began not with a bang, but with a quiet click of a mouse and the low hum of my scanner. If Brenda was going to weaponize the rules, I was going to become the world's foremost scholar on the Harmony Glades Homeowners Association. I requested minutes from all HOA meetings for the past 2 years, financial statements, records of all violation notices issued, and, most importantly, the Architectural Review Committee's approvals and denials. The management company, likely unaccustomed to such comprehensive requests from a mere homeowner, dragged their feet, but I was persistent, quoting the sections of the HOA bylaws that mandated transparency. Slowly, the documents trickled in, first as poorly scanned PDFs, then as grudgingly provided hard copies. I spread them across my workshop table, the scent of sawdust mingling with the dry smell of official paper. It was like assembling a giant, frustrating puzzle. I cross-referenced names, dates, and decisions, looking for patterns, for inconsistencies, for anything that might give me leverage. It was tedious, exacting work, the kind that makes your eyes burn and your brain feel like overstretched elastic. But with every highlighted discrepancy, with every questionable expenditure I circled in red, my resolve grew. Brenda, in her arrogance, probably assumed no one would ever bother to look this closely. She was wrong. During this period, I started talking more to my neighbors, not just casual chats over the fence, but real conversations. I recounted my towing saga, and it was like opening a floodgate. Old Mr. Abernathy, a retired history professor, told me how Brenda had hounded him for weeks about the unapproved historical replica birdhouse he'd had in his yard for a decade. Sarah, a young mum down the street, had received a violation for her kid's brightly colored playset. Deemed aesthetically jarring, it became clear that my truck was just the latest casualty in Brenda's quiet war on individuality and common sense. Many were intimidated, afraid of fines or further harassment, but a few, like me, were angry. A retired accountant named George, who lived 2 streets over, had his own suspicions about the HOA's finances but lacked the time to dig. A younger woman, Maria, who was an environmental lawyer, was concerned about some of Brenda's recent landscaping initiatives that seemed to involve a lot of expensive, non-native plants sourced from a single, very pricey nursery. These conversations were crucial. They not only validated my own experience but also began to forge a small, informal alliance. We were all Davids, facing the same self-important Goliath. My aha moment didn't come from the HOA documents directly, but from a tangential search. Frustrated with the opaque nature of the HOA's dealings, I started looking into publicly available property records and city zoning ordinances for Harmony Glades. I pulled up the plat map for our development, a detailed diagram showing every lot, every boundary line, every easement, and then I looked up Brenda Knott's property, Lot 47. A nice corner lot, one of the larger ones in the development. According to the plat map, there was a significant public utility easement running along the entire rear of her property, a 10-foot wide strip designated for underground power lines and drainage. Standard stuff. But then I remembered seeing some photos from a recent HOA newsletter, Brenda proudly showcasing her newly expanded outdoor entertainment patio, complete with a massive built-in barbecue island and a rather elaborate pergola. The photos were taken from an angle that showed her back fence. I pulled them up on my monitor, zoomed in, and then compared them to the plat map on my other screen. A slow grin spread across my face. Her outdoor entertainment patio, that monument to suburban aspiration, complete with its fancy stonework and integrated lighting, wasn't just on the easement, it was dominating it. At least half of the new construction, including the heavy barbecue island, was sitting squarely where it had no legal right to be. Building a permanent structure on a public utility easement is a major no-no. It can impede access for repairs, damage underground lines, and cause all sorts of drainage nightmares. It's the kind of violation that cities don't just frown upon, they actively prosecute, often demanding the removal of the offending structure at the owner's expense. Brenda Knott, the self-appointed guardian of Harmony Glades rules and aesthetics, the woman who had my truck towed for purely imaginary infractions, had a ticking time bomb of a code violation in her own backyard. A very expensive, very visible time bomb. The irony was so thick, so delicious, I almost laughed out loud. She had towed my truck from my property for a phantom violation. I had just found the legal equivalent of a towhook for her entire backyard oasis, and potentially her credibility as HOA president. The game had just changed dramatically. This wasn't just about my 350 anymore. This was about exposing hypocrisy on a grand scale. The discovery of Brenda's easement encroachment was the fulcrum, the point on which this whole affair would pivot, but a discovery is only as good as the evidence supporting it. I needed to be meticulous, unassailable. My workshop, usually a sanctuary of wood shavings and project plans, transformed into a war room. The plat maps were pinned to one wall, city zoning codes to another. I spent an afternoon discreetly taking photographs from the street behind Brenda's house, capturing the impressive scale of her patio and its clear intrusion into the easement zone. The angle wasn't perfect, but it was enough to raise serious questions. Then, I filed a public records request with the City Planning Department for any permits issued for Lot 47 in the last 5 years. Surprise, surprise, there were permits for a minor fence repair and a re-roofing, but nothing, absolutely nothing, for a major patio expansion, a built-in barbecue island, or a pergola. This was gold. Not only was the structure on an easement, but it was also likely unpermitted, a double whammy of non-compliance. My next step was to consult with Maria, the environmental lawyer from down the street. I laid out my findings for her one evening over coffee. Her eyes widened as she looked at the plat map, the photos, and the lack of permits. "Mike," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, This is beautiful. If what you suspect is true, and this structure is unpermitted and encroaching on a PUE, she's in a world of trouble. The city could order her to demolish it. Fines could be substantial. Maria offered to look into the specific municipal codes related to easement violations and unpermitted structures to ensure we had the exact letter of the law on our side. Meanwhile, George, the retired accountant, took a fresh look at the HOA financials I'd obtained, specifically searching for any payments related to Brenda's property or unusual landscaping expenses that might coincide with her patio project. While he didn't find a direct smoking gun showing HOA funds used for her private construction, he did uncover a pattern of vaguely described common area beautification projects initiated by Brenda that were significantly over budget and awarded to a single, very expensive contractor, the same one. It turned out from a quick online search who specialized in high-end patios and outdoor kitchens. It was circumstantial, but it stank. Brenda, emboldened by her perceived victory over my truck, continued her reign. She sent out a new flurry of violation notices, one for a family whose basketball hoop was allegedly half an inch too close to the sidewalk, another for someone whose wind chimes were deemed excessively cacophonous. Each new act of petty tyranny only fueled the growing resentment within the neighborhood and solidified the resolve of our little band of dissenters. We were no longer just grumbling individuals, we were becoming a coordinated resistance. I made sure every piece of evidence was impeccably organized. Dated photographs, official documents, copies of city ordinances highlighted in the relevant sections, Maria's legal notes, George's financial queries. I was building a case so solid, so undeniable, that not even Brenda's bluster could find a crack. This wasn't about revenge anymore, not entirely. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring that the person enforcing the rules wasn't flagrantly breaking far more serious ones herself. The satisfaction of this meticulous preparation was immense, a craftsman's joy in building something strong and true. Brenda thought she was the enforcer. She was about to find out what it felt like to be on the receiving end of a well-documented, legally sound takedown. The plan began to crystallize, not as a shouted accusation, but as a calm, methodical presentation of facts. The upcoming annual HOA meeting seemed like the perfect venue. It was the one time of year a significant number of homeowners gathered, and there was usually an open forum segment where residents could voice concerns. I wasn't just going to voice a concern, I was going to drop a bombshell. I began to draft my presentation, structuring it like a legal argument. Start with the small injustice, the towing of my truck, to establish Brenda's pattern of overreach and arbitrary enforcement. Then pivot to the larger issue, the integrity and fairness of the HOA under her leadership, and finally, the coup de grace, the detailed, irrefutable evidence of her own significant violations. Maria helped me refine the legal language, ensuring I was precise and accurate. George offered to prepare a brief summary of his financial concerns, focusing on the lack of transparency and questionable expenditures under Brenda's tenure, which would lend further weight to the idea that something was rotten in the State of Harmony Glades. My hidden skill, if you could call it that, wasn't just carpentry, it was an innate attention to detail, a love for research, and a stubborn refusal to be bullied. Years of deciphering complex building codes for my projects, of navigating supplier contracts, of meticulously planning every cut and joint, had honed these abilities. Brenda had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. She was about to learn that quiet people are often the ones observing, liasing, and preparing. I compiled everything into a neat, professional-looking binder, with copies for every board member, and a summary handout for any interested residents. I even prepared a short slideshow with the plat map, the damning photos of her patio, and close-ups of the relevant city ordinances. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst, it was going to be an execution, performed with surgical precision. As the date of the annual meeting approached, a palpable sense of anticipation, mixed with a healthy dose of trepidation, settled over me. What if she tried to shut me down? What if the other board members, cronies of hers, circled the wagons? I rehearsed my presentation in my workshop, speaking to an audience of sawhorses and tool chests, refining my delivery, anticipating her possible objections, and preparing calm, factual rebuttals. My wife, initially worried about the hornet's nest I was poking, saw the methodical way I was approaching it, and became my biggest supporter. "You've got this, Mike," she'd say. "She underestimated you. Show them all." The metaphor of towing her house off the street had evolved in my mind. It wasn't about physically moving her bricks and mortar, it was about stripping away the facade of her authority, exposing the rot underneath, and through the due process she so readily abused, effectively dismantling her position of power and the ill-gotten gains of her hypocrisy. Her house, her standing in the community, her self-proclaimed moral high ground, that's what I was aiming to tow away, leaving her exposed on the barren land of her own deceit. The days leading up to the meeting were a strange mix of calm focus and buzzing adrenaline. The dossier was complete. The allies were ready. Brenda Knott, blissfully unaware, was about to walk into a carefully prepared ambush, armed not with anger, but with undeniable truth. The community clubhouse buzzed with a higher-than-usual energy on the evening of the annual HOA meeting. Usually, these affairs were sparsely attended, dry recitations of budgets and committee reports. Tonight, however, word had subtly spread. Perhaps it was the lingering discontent from Brenda's recent flurry of violations, or perhaps some of my allies had discreetly encouraged attendance. Whatever the reason, the room was nearly full. I saw Mr. Abernathy giving me a hopeful nod, Sarah with the playset offering a small, nervous smile. George and Maria were already there, seated near the front, their expressions carefully neutral. Brenda Knott presided from a table at the front, flanked by the other 4 board members, 2 who seemed to be her loyal acolytes, and 2 others who always looked vaguely uncomfortable. As if they'd wandered into the wrong meeting, Brenda herself was in her element, radiating an aura of supreme confidence. She opened the meeting with a glowing summary of her achievements over the past year, painting a picture of Harmony Glades as a utopia of perfect lawns and compliant residents. Largely thanks to her diligent oversight. The irony was almost too much to bear. I sat patiently through the Treasurer's report, which George listened to with an almost imperceptible frown, and the Landscaping Committee's update, which mentioned the successful completion of the South Perimeter Beautification Project, conveniently omitting any details about its exorbitant cost or Brenda's personal interest in the contractor. Finally, Brenda announced, "We now move to the open forum. Does anyone have any brief comments or questions for the board?" This was my cue. I stood up, my binder in hand. "Yes, Madam President, I do." A small murmur went through the room. All eyes turned to me. Brenda's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place, a little too bright, a little too forced. "Ah, Mr. Davies, please keep it concise. We have a lot to get through." Her tone was dismissive, as if anticipating another tiresome complaint about a towed vehicle. "I will be as concise as the evidence allows, Brenda," I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying easily through the suddenly quiet room. I walked to the front, near the small projector I'd asked the management company to provide, a request they'd grudgingly fulfilled. "My name is Mike Davies, and I live on Willow Creek Lane. Many of you know me. Some of you may know that a few weeks ago, my truck was towed from my own driveway at the behest of our HOA president, allegedly for an unapproved commercial signage violation. I clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared, a photo of my truck, parked innocently in my driveway, followed by a close-up of the violation notice Brenda had signed. A violation, I might add, I continued, that does not exist anywhere in our CC Groupies. I have a copy here, highlighted, for anyone who doubts it. I held up my annotated bylaws. This cost me $350 and a great deal of aggravation. But this isn't just about my truck or my money. It's about a pattern of arbitrary enforcement, questionable decision-making, and a fundamental lack of fairness that has come to characterize the leadership of this HOA under Ms. Pond. Not. Brenda started to interrupt, her face flushing. "Now, see here, Mr. Davies, this is hardly the forum for personal grievances." With all due respect, Brenda, I cut her off smoothly. This is precisely the forum. Because my personal grievance is symptomatic of a much larger problem, and that problem, it turns out, might have its roots very close to home. Your home, to be precise. The room was utterly silent now, a thick, expectant hush. Brenda's eyes narrowed. The 2 uncomfortable board members leaned forward, intrigued despite themselves. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise on Brenda Knott's carefully constructed world of hypocrisy. "Let's talk about rules, Brenda," I began, my voice even, almost conversational, as I advanced to the next slide. It showed the official plat map of Harmony Glades, with Lot 47, her lot, clearly highlighted. We all agree, I assume, that HOA rules and indeed city ordinances should apply equally to everyone, including those who enforce them. I paused, letting the rhetorical question hang in the air. Brenda, visibly flustered now, sputtered, "Of course they do. What are you insinuating, Mr. Davies?" "I'm not insinuating anything, Brenda, I'm presenting facts." Click. The next slide showed an aerial view from a public mapping service, zoomed in on her backyard. Click. A close-up of the 10-foot public utility easement running along her rear property line, clearly marked on the plat. "As you can see," I explained, "there's a significant PUE here. These easements are vital for utility access and drainage. They are not to be obstructed by permanent structures." Then came the pièce de résistance. Click. A series of photographs I had taken, juxtaposed with images from the HOA's own newsletter showcasing Brenda's newly expanded outdoor entertainment patio. The images clearly showed her elaborate stone patio, the massive built-in barbecue island, and the substantial pergola, all encroaching significantly, in some places, entirely consuming that 10-foot easement. Gasps rippled through the audience. "This," I said, gesturing to the screen, "is not a minor infraction, like supposedly unsightly lettering on a truck, or petunias that are too vibrant. This is a major violation of both HOA guidelines regarding property alterations and, more seriously, city ordinances regarding easement encroachment and unpermitted construction." I then displayed the response from the City Planning Department. "No permits on file for Lot 47 for patio construction, outdoor kitchen, or pergola." Brenda was pale. Her usual composure completely shattered. She looked like she'd been slapped. "This is an outrage, slander, those are improvements," she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. "Improvements, Brenda?" I countered calmly. "Or unpermitted, illegal structures built on land you don't fully control, potentially jeopardizing utility access for this entire section of the neighborhood. Improvements that, if the city orders their removal, which they are well within their rights to do, could cost you tens of thousands of dollars to demolish and restore." I let that sink in. The towing of her house was no longer just a metaphor in my mind. It was a tangible, looming threat to her financial well-being and her carefully curated image. I continued, laying out the specific city codes she had violated, the potential fines, the legal ramifications. Maria had coached me well. The presentation was watertight. I then briefly touched upon George's findings regarding the HOA's questionable financial dealings under her leadership. The opaque contracts awarded for beautification projects that seemed to benefit certain contractors favored by Brenda. It painted a picture not of a diligent president, but of someone who viewed the HOA as her personal fiefdom, a tool for her own benefit and to bully her neighbors. When I finished, there was a stunned silence. Then a low hum of conversation erupted. People were looking at Brenda, then at the screen, then back at Brenda. Her face was a mask of fury and dawning panic. The two board members who usually seemed to be in her pocket looked shocked and uncertain. The other two looked grimly vindicated. The foundation of Brenda Knott's authority had just been systematically dismantled, brick by hypocritical brick. Her meticulously built house of self-importance was teetering on the brink, ready to be towed away by the very rules she had so arrogantly flouted. The immediate aftermath of my presentation was a study in controlled chaos. Brenda, for once, seemed utterly speechless. Her usual arsenal of condescension and bureaucratic jargon had failed her. She attempted a weak defense, claiming the patio was pre-existing when she bought the house, then that she had verbal approval from someone at the city, vague, unsubstantiated claims that withered under the glare of the documented evidence I had presented. The other board members were now peppering her with questions. Mr. Henderson, a quiet man who usually deferred to Brenda, asked sharply, "Brenda, did you or did you not obtain permits for this construction? Yes or no?" Her inability to provide a straight answer was damning. George then stood up and formally requested a full independent audit of the HOA's finances for the past 2 years, citing the concerns I had raised about opaque contracting. Maria, in her capacity as a resident and a lawyer, stated for the record that the easement encroachment was a serious liability, not just for Brenda personally, but potentially for the HOA, if it was found to have knowingly ignored such a significant violation by its own president. The mood in the room had shifted entirely. The initial shock had given way to a palpable sense of anger and betrayal among the residents. People who had been cowed by Brenda's petty tyrannies now found their voices, sharing their own stories of her overreach and unfair treatment. The meeting, scheduled to end at 9 p.m., dragged on past 10. The board, minus a visibly crumbling Brenda, went into an emergency closed session in a side room. We could hear raised voices. When they emerged, the interim spokesman, one of the previously uncomfortable-looking board members, announced two immediate actions. First, Brenda Knott was suspended from all presidential duties pending a full investigation into the allegations concerning her property and financial conduct. Second, an independent investigator and an auditor would be hired immediately. The relief in the room was tangible, like a storm breaking. Brenda tried to protest, to reassert her authority, but her voice was drowned out. She looked around, seeking support, but found only stony faces or people deliberately avoiding her gaze. The power she had wielded so carelessly had evaporated before her eyes. Her downfall was swift and, in a way, perfectly symmetrical. She had used the HOA rules as a cudgel against others. Now, those same principles of accountability and adherence to regulations were being used to dismantle her reign. The towing was in full effect, not of her physical house, but of her authority, her reputation, and her ability to impose her will on Harmony Glades. In the following weeks, the investigation moved quickly. The city, alerted by an anonymous tip, I have no idea who could have possibly sent that, along with a full dossier of evidence, sent a code enforcement officer to inspect Brenda's property. The officer confirmed the easement encroachment and the lack of permits. Brenda was issued a formal notice of violation, giving her 30 days to either remove the offending structures or face significant daily fines and legal action. The cost of demolition and restoration of the easement was estimated to be well over $50,000. Her beautiful, ill-gotten patio became a symbol of her hubris. The independent audit of the HOA finances also revealed a pattern of irregularities, including several instances where Brenda had steered contracts to friends or associates at inflated prices, and a general lack of oversight for expenditures she had personally authorized. It wasn't outright embezzlement, but it was a clear abuse of her position for personal benefit and cronyism. The final act of Brenda's HOA drama came a month later, at a specially convened meeting. The investigator presented his findings. The evidence was overwhelming. A motion was made for her permanent removal from the board and as president. It passed unanimously, with even her former acolytes voting against her to save their own skins. Brenda wasn't even there. She had submitted a terse, one-sentence resignation letter the day before, effective immediately. Her reign was officially over. As for me, I remained firm but avoided any public gloating. My goal had been justice and the restoration of fairness, not just personal revenge, though I admit the satisfaction was profound. The $350 I'd paid to the impound lot was quietly refunded to me by the interim HOA board, accompanied by a formal, written apology for the erroneous towing incident. It was a small victory in monetary terms, but it symbolized a much larger one. The system, when pushed by determined individuals armed with facts, could indeed correct itself. The air in Harmony Glades felt lighter, cleaner. The metaphorical storm clouds that Brenda had cast over the neighborhood had finally dispersed. My truck, gleaming in its rightful spot, seemed to shine a little brighter. The battle had been stressful, time-consuming, and at times, infuriating. But seeing the tangible results, the restoration of sanity and fairness, made every ounce of effort worthwhile. Brenda had learned a hard lesson. Underestimating the quiet guy with the old truck and a penchant for research can have devastating consequences for one's illegally built patio and one's inflated ego. The ousting of Brenda Knott ushered in a new era for Harmony Glades. It wasn't an overnight transformation into a utopian paradise, but the change was palpable. An interim board, composed of some of the more reasonable members from the old guard and a few newly volunteered residents, including To my initial surprise and eventual agreement, myself, roped in to help oversee the transition, took the helm. Our first priority was transparency. All financials were posted online, meeting minutes were detailed and promptly distributed. A committee was formed to review and simplify the CC rupees, to remove ambiguous language and ensure that the rules were clear, fair, and actually served the community rather than the ego of a single individual. The overly zealous enforcement of petty violations ceased. People started planting slightly more vibrant petunias without fear. Kids' playsets were no longer considered aesthetic affronts. There was a collective exhale, a sense of a burden lifted. My role on the interim board was temporary, focused mainly on helping to establish better processes for architectural review, ensuring they were based on actual rules, not personal whimsy, and improving communication. I had no desire to become the next Brenda, a new sheriff in town. My goal had always been to dismantle a flawed system, not to take it over. The situation with my truck, the original spark for this whole conflagration, was fully resolved. Not only was the impound fee refunded with an apology, but the interim board also passed a clarifying amendment to the bylaws, explicitly stating that standard discreet business lettering on personal vehicles used by residents did not constitute a violation. It was a small, common-sense clarification that should never have been necessary, but it felt good to see it enshrined. As for Brenda, the fallout for her was considerable. The city didn't budge on the easement violation. Faced with mounting fines and the prohibitive cost of demolition, she was forced to remove the lavish patio, the barbecue island, and the pergola. Her backyard, once a monument to her self-importance, became a muddy, barren testament to her downfall. The financial hit was substantial. The whispers around the neighborhood were that she was struggling to pay for the demolition and the necessary restoration of the easement. The grand house on the corner lot suddenly seemed a lot less grand. I never saw her again at any community events. A few months later, a "for sale" sign appeared in her yard. It stayed there for a long time, the stigma of the illegal construction and the HOA scandal apparently making it a hard sell. Eventually it sold, presumably for less than she had hoped. Her house, in every sense of the word, had indeed been towed off the street, leaving behind only the cautionary tale of her arrogance. I often reflected on the whole ordeal. It had consumed a significant chunk of my time and energy. There were moments of intense frustration, of wanting to just give up and pay the damn fine to make the problem go away. But the injustice of it, Brenda's sheer, unadulterated smugness, had lit a fire under me. It taught me the incredible power of meticulous research and the importance of standing your ground when you know you're in the right. It also showed me that even a seemingly entrenched, petty tyrant can be toppled if you find their weak spot and apply pressure consistently and intelligently. The lesson wasn't just for me, it resonated through Harmony Glades. Neighbors were more engaged, more willing to question decisions, more aware of their rights and responsibilities. The HOA became less of an adversarial force and more of a collaborative one, which is what it should have been all along. My cherry red F-150, still parked proudly in my driveway, became a quiet symbol of that victory, a reminder that sometimes fighting for a small principle can lead to a much larger, more meaningful change, and every now and then when I'm out in my workshop, surrounded by the familiar scent of sawdust, I allow myself a small, satisfied smile. Brenda Knott had tried to make an example of me and my truck. In the end, the only example made was of her. Life in Harmony Glades settled into a new, more genuinely harmonious rhythm. The HOA meetings became productive, albeit slightly duller, affairs, which, frankly, was a welcome change. People discussed actual community improvements, like upgrading the playground equipment or organizing a neighborhood watch, instead of debating the precise, acceptable Pantone shade for front doors. My brief stint on the interim board ended, and I was happy to return to civilian life, focusing on my carpentry business, which, if anything, got a little boost from my newfound local notoriety as the guy who took on the HOA Karen and won. Sometimes new neighbors would hear a garbled version of the story and ask me about it. Usually with a tone of awe. I'd just chuckle and say it was mostly about reading the fine print. The towing her house off the street line became a bit of a local legend, evolving with each retelling. Some versions had me orchestrating a midnight raid with a real tow truck and a crew of disgruntled homeowners to physically dismantle her patio, which, while tempting in moments of peak frustration, was never actually part of the plan. I always clarified that the towing was purely metaphorical, a strategic dismantling of her power and the exposure of her own profound hypocrisy, using the very rules she claimed to uphold. The effect, however, was just as devastating to her standing as if a fleet of heavy-duty wreckers had indeed descended upon Lot 47. Brenda eventually moved away, her departure as unceremonious as her downfall. The house sold to a young family who seemed blissfully unaware of its recent dramatic history, and they promptly planted a very colorful and entirely unregulated vegetable garden in the newly restored backyard easement. It felt like a final, quiet victory for common sense. My neighbors, especially Mr. Quarter Abernathy, Sarah, George, and Maria, remained good friends. We'd often share a laugh about the Brenda days, a sort of shorthand for that period of low-grade suburban warfare. We had faced a common enemy and emerged stronger, more connected as a community. It's funny how a shared grievance, especially against an antagonist as universally irritating as Brenda, can forge bonds. I learned that even in the most manicured of suburbs, the principles of justice and fairness are worth fighting for, and that one person, armed with facts, determination, and maybe a well-loved old truck that symbolizes their independence, can indeed make a difference. So, if you ever find yourself up against an overzealous HOA president, a power-tripping bureaucrat, or anyone who thinks they can make up rules as they go along, remember my story. Don't just get mad, get smart, dig into the details, find their vulnerabilities. Sometimes the most effective way to deal with a bully who thinks their house is a castle is to politely, legally, and metaphorically tow it right off their high horse and onto the hard ground of reality. The satisfaction, I can tell you from experience, is immense, and the peace that follows, priceless. My cherry red F-150 continues to be a proud, if slightly weathered, fixture in my driveway, its discreet business lettering a quiet testament to a battle fought and won. A symbol that even in Harmony Glades, true harmony sometimes requires a little bit of righteous rebellion.